I've been waiting to make this video for nearly 2 months. For you lovely lot watching this at home, it should be Boxing Day now, so if you celebrate it, Merry Christmas. For me, it's a crisp December morning. Freezing cold, slightly foggy, and seriously bloody exciting because today we're going to have a look at my new car. If you follow me on Instagram or Twitter, you will already have seen a few teasers as to what this new car is. And I have to say, it's worse in every conceivable way than Melvin. And for that reason, predictably, I love it to bits. I must have driven over 600 miles now, although it's hard to say because the speedometer's broken. But I think that's enough to really make sense of the fact that I adore this car. And what helps tremendously is the fact that under its bonnet is the power unit that I have wanted in my car since I was 5 years old. Even just starting the engine of this car makes me incredibly happy. What we know so far is that she has black bumpers, some kind of slit kind of vent somewhere in the bodywork. She obviously now has a sunroof as well. She's red and she's from 1987. And what I can tell you is that quite a few people have already got what it is. A couple of people have got it spot on and quite a few other people have got somewhere in the vicinity. They're either a little bit more vague or they're just off the scent because they've tried to be too particular. But anyway, this is my new daily driver. She's not in perfect condition by any stretch of the imagination. She's got a number of little mechanical issues and cosmetic issues that will be brilliant because it means that I can sort them on the channel. It now also means I have 2 cars, so I'm less worried about not being able to drive one by trying to fix it myself. So this is a massive improvement already. Right, so final guesses please. This is Melody, my 1987 Austin Metro 1.3L 5-door. Isn't she absolutely magnificent? Yes, it is another Metro, but if you believe A-Series and K-Series Metros are cut from the same cloth, then frankly you need your head screwing on, because having driven, as I said, about 600 miles in this thing, I can tell you that they are completely different in almost every respect, apart from the immediate body shell and some of the interior components. So we'll get to why I actually have Melody and how I got her and all that kind of stuff in a minute. But for now, let's actually talk about what this car is. So little Melody here, as she was christened by one of my close friends after Melody Pond from Doctor Who, like a name in a fairy tale, if you get the reference. She is a Mark II Austin Metro. The original Austin Metro was launched in October 1980, and it was quite good at the time, although it did use quite a lot of mechanical components from the original Mini. The Mark II Metro, like this, was launched in late 1984, and it was just a bit of a facelift really. New front end, some little engineering changes underneath, big interior improvements, but most importantly for that 1984 facelift was the addition of a 5-door model like Melody. Now the reason he made these changes was because frankly the Super Mini market was moving on quite dramatically. The Metro may have been pretty good when it was launched in 1980, but by 1984 the second generation of Super Minis like the Renault Supersank, the Peugeot 205, the Vauxhall Nova, the facelifted Ford Fiesta, the Fiat Uno, and probably quite a few others as well had been launched, making the Metro look quite old-fashioned. It also made the Ford Fiesta look quite old-fashioned as well, but this was definitely looking quite old hat by 1984, so they just modernised it a bit, made it a little bit fresher in the market, gave it a proper interior, stuff like that I've already mentioned. Melody is from 1987, which is halfway through the run of Mark II Metros. Melvin is a Mark III Metro, which is a staggering facelift and complete mechanical overhaul of the car that was launched in May 1990. But this retains essentially all of the original Metro characteristics and all the characteristics as well, therefore, of the Mini. So under the bonnet is an old BMC overhead valve A-Series engine. Well, in this case it's the A+, as it was revised slightly for the Metro. 1275cc, which is great, about 63 brake horsepower, but we'll get to that in a minute. Melody is Targa Red. She's a 1.3L, so she's about halfway up the trim range, which started out as the City, which is the base model, then the City X, then the 1 litre L and the 1.3 L, and then I think at this point you had, in 1987, I think you still had the Mayfair, which was one up from the L, and then you had your MGs and your Van and Plasses, which were your hot ones and your luxurious ones respectively. At least I think that was the trim range anyway. So the 1.3L is about halfway in between, and Melody's got a few little extras as well that just make her a little bit nicer. All her trim is in Nimbus Grey, which is this mad grey colour, and all the bumpers are black, which is wrong. They should all be grey, but that's the way she is. She shouldn't have alloys from factory. She should have metric steels. So a lot of manufacturers in the 1980s decided to move on from imperial wheel and tyre sizes and move towards metric. Now that kind of makes sense in theory, but then people realised that inches are quite a sensible way of measuring wheels, so they kind of stopped doing that later on. So that now means that finding tyres for the metric wheels are impossible. You haven't been able to get any for 15 years, and the people that do rock about on metric wheels still are rocking about on 15-year-old tyres, which is not something I really want to be doing. So Melody has alloys fitted from an MG Metro, specifically a Mark 1 MG Metro 1300. These are 12-inch wheels. They're a little bit wrecked and they don't have the MG centre caps, but they are MG Metro alloys. She also has a cool MG Metro style decal down the side. It doesn't say MG like it would on an MG, but these, I believe, are aftermarket. They've been created and put on the car since she was built. Certainly I've never seen another Metro with decals like this. They do seem to have been fitted by someone who is visually impaired, because they aren't quite on straight and they don't actually even really quite fit the car. I suppose that's typical Austin Rover, so maybe it does fit in with the factory kind of thing. But yeah, I absolutely love it, and I love these little touches that make her just slightly different to any other Metro 1.3L and make her look a little bit more rakish as well. Not that a Metro ever really was very rakish. So from the front, Melody of course is a Mark II Metro, which means new bonnet, new grille, new lamps that made it a little bit more aerodynamic than the Mark 1. But I really like the way these look. I didn't used to like them quite as much as I do now, but I think these are a really, really good looking little car. Certainly very retro and 80s at least, if nothing else. Of course, as I said, the grey trim strip down the side contrasts a bit with the black bumpers, but that'll be addressed maybe by taking off the trim around the gutters and on the side here and respraying the mirrors to match the bumpers, because I think that would look quite good. So underneath this front end, of course, is the A-Series engine. We'll get to that in a second, but the suspension at the front, you could describe it, if you were being generous, as double wishbone, with Hydrogas doing this actual suspension. So Hydrogas is featured in a lot of my videos and was a stalwart of BL, BMC, Austin Rover cars for years and years and years. Essentially, you have a big sphere with a diaphragm in the middle of it. I say sphere, it's more like two spheres put together with a diaphragm in between them. In the top half you have nitrogen gas, which provides the springing. In the bottom half you have hydroelastic fluid that provides the damping. This is a little compact unit, only about that big, that just sits on top of the wishbones at the front, so it's a really compact system, no need for any struts, and at the back they can be mounted horizontally should I say, so that everything is a lot more compact under the rear end, and it means that the packaging of this car is immense. Linking the two front sides of the suspension is a front anti-roll bar, but I don't quite know why. These cars handle perfectly well, and when we'll get to the rear suspension in a minute, it could do with one at the back more than it could do with one at the front, but I digress. Underneath these mad 12-inch pepper pot wheels, which are very, very cool, but I might get new wheels because these aren't in the best condition. Underneath them are 8.4-inch, I think, ventilated discs with 4 piston brake calipers. Austin Rover massively overspec'd the brakes on quite a lot of their cars for about a decade or so. So these brakes are a really popular addition to Minis, which at the time had much subtler, less powerful brakes, and brakes from cars that were a bit bigger, so your Princesses and stuff like that, are quite often pilfered for the likes of Fords, which are a bit more popular for competition use and racing for obvious reasons. But these brakes are brilliant, and I will say, quite a lot better than Melvin's. this is despite the fact that when I went and picked Melody up, which we'll get to in a minute because that's a whole story in itself, the brakes were covered in cobwebs, so God knows how long it has been since they were touched, but they work brilliantly and they're massively over-spec'd. The fact that Melody has 5 doors makes a huge difference because I use my Metros all the time, and frankly it was quite annoying getting my friends and any stuff that I wanted in the back of the car, so this already has proved itself invaluable, and I don't quite get why people have such a distaste for 5-door cars, because in my experience they might not look as cool, but oh my god, they're so much more practical. So just little drum brakes down here at the back, that's all you really need, to be honest. If you put this on them, you just end up locking up. In the back window, she has a back flash because it's the 80s, don't you know? I might get rid of that because, I don't know, maybe it's a bit too 80s, but I quite like looking in the rearview mirror and seeing the big red back flash because, yeah, it's great. And also everybody that's seen this car, whether they're around in the 80s or not, you know, even my friends, have said that's cool, so every day I get closer to keeping it. I don't know, write down below if you think I should keep it or not, but yeah, these are all the little things that I need to decide with this car because she's not in perfect condition. She's perfectly serviceable and usable. Mechanically she's pretty good. She needs a few things doing to her, but cosmetically there are a few rough areas, which is brilliant because it means that, well, I can get to work and, you know, make her better and make loads of videos on her, so this is all very entertaining. So I said I was going to mention the rear suspension, which is, again, Hydrogas, semi-trailing arms, which, you know, pretty standard for a small car. But that means that it should have independent rear suspension, which, you know, should be brilliant for a car of this size in this era. However, usually with Hydrogas and Hydrolastic before it, BL, Austin Rover, BMC, whatever they wanted to call themselves that week, would link each wheel to its front self. So this driver's side rear wheel will be linked via a pipe to the front one, so just with the fluid half of the system, so that it would not level out, but when you go over bumps it would stay as flat as possible by increasing the pressure in one and sending fluid down the pipe to the other to increase the pressure in the rear wheel. But with the Metro, when they launched it in 1980, they decided not to do that. So the 2 front units are independent and the 2 rear units are linked side to side, which has no conceivable benefit as far as anybody's concerned, but there you go. Apparently it was to do with cost cutting, but if they really wanted to cost cut, they wouldn't have put any linking on it and made it fully independent, but there you are. When Melvin came around in 1990, they completely changed that and decided it was a stupid idea and linked it properly like they did in all the other BL cars. So that's a weird quirk of this car, and it gets me back on again to that front anti-roll bar, because with the units linked side to side at the back, when you go around a corner, this car really rolls, especially at the back, but she does at the front as well, to be fair. She could do with a rear anti-roll bar. Preferably she could do with being individualised at the back, which isn't a difficult task. Might do it, who knows. What I do know is that the suspension is slightly shot. Because of the nature of Hydrogas, the nitrogen half of the system can escape over time. This car's 34 years old. Gas does that. So the ride quality is pretty horrendous. The fluid half is what controls the ride height as well, so that's what you can pump up at home, and that's what I did the other week with Melvin. Probably a few months ago now for you. But yeah, should we have a look under the bonnet? So, with these original Metros, and I said before about the differences between the A-Series and K-Series Metros, K-Series Metros have a longer wheelbase. The entire front end is longer on a K, and having the 2 cars side by side, oh my god, you can genuinely see the difference in the wheelbase and the fact that the front wings are longer. But this is, of course, the BMC A-Series engine, the engine I've wanted in a car of mine since I was about 5 years old, because I've always wanted a Mini, and I still will get a Mini at some point. So this is a very, very simple, old-fashioned cast iron overhead valve engine, 1275cc with a single HIF SU carburetor, HIF 44 to be precise, producing about 62, 63 brake horsepower around there. And she does really go as well. 0 to 60 should be about 12.9 seconds. She isn't quite doing that at the moment, but she feels a lot quicker than I expected her to be honest. You'll notice as well that the engine is completely central in the engine bay, and that's because BMC effectively pioneered or popularised, should we say, modern transverse engine front-wheel drive layouts with this engine and its gearbox, because of course it's all just taken from the Mini. So the gearbox is not on the end like you'd expect from a modern car, it is instead underneath in the sump, which leads to some interesting characteristics, including the fact that the engine oil and the gearbox oil is shared. It also means for some interesting gear changes as well, a rather vague rod change in this car, and second gear synchro meshes that like to eat themselves. But she works and she's great, and A-Series engines sound brilliant and they perform really well, and they're endlessly tunable, so you can go and get conversion kits for this off the shelf that get you 100 horsepower straight away. One thing that Austin Rover did do quite well with their engines, the A-Series in particular, they always painted their engines. And you can actually tell what engine a Metro has by the colour of the block. So the 1 litre Metros, the 998s, they painted yellow, and the 1275s like this, they painted red, which is cool. So another thing you might notice about this car from the front is the fact that the badge says Metro. And we'll see it at the back as well, that this car does not say Austin on it anywhere. And that is due to another little quirk of British motoring history. In early 1987, Austin Rover decided, due to market research, that the Austin brand didn't hold the value it once did. Essentially, the 1970s had caught up with them, and people viewed Austins as a bit subpar and also as old people cars. And so they decided to stop badging their cars as Austin. So suddenly the Mini, Metro, Maestro and Montego all lost their Austin badging, and because they were so popular and so well known, they just became known by their names. So though this car has a kind of Austin Rover logo at the front here, it doesn't say Austin anywhere on it, it just says Metro over the top of it, and you're expected just to kind of know where it comes from. And so at the back, obviously no Austin badges, as you may have come to expect now. Everything is very simple around here. You can see more clearly now the back flash. Original dealer sticker, original dealer plates as well, which is very cool. I love that kind of thing. An original exhaust as well. These are getting really difficult to find now. So the fact that she still has an original exhaust is quite something, though. That might come off, as it did with Melvin. It may get swapped for something a little bit rortier. In the front feels much more familiar, partially because, well, you know, I drive Melvin all the time, so this car does feel familiar until you actually start to think about it. So this dashboard is the same as Melvin's dashboard. Fundamentally, it's the same design, different cowling around here, different dials, all that kind of stuff, but fundamentally it looks the same until you start digging in deeper. Now at some point I will make a video about that whole Roverization of the Metro, but you start to notice that every single little plastic component has been revised or redesigned in here. So even these door handles, like you'll notice here, there's no interior door handle, because on the Austin Metros they do unfortunately have a tendency for the screw holes to snap and then they fall off like that. The Rover Metros, it looks the same, but they redesigned the screw hole so it doesn't do that anymore. The dashboard, the top of the dash is redesigned so it doesn't warp ever so slightly like they do on the Austins. Everything is just slightly different. And they're the only things that you really notice when you actually sit in one after the other. If you sat in them both if you sat in them both, you know, on their lonesome months apart, you wouldn't notice. And you think, oh yeah, it's just the same thing in here. But then you realise the amount of effort they must have put into roverising the car. But I digress yet again. There are a few 80s touches to the interior of this car. So you have the instruments, which have this checkered pattern to the back of them. Obviously, as I said, the car's speedo has broken, but that's one of those things that I will fix on video hopefully soon. She's only done 40,000 miles. That will be 41 now because I put on a few more, but apparently the speedo did work when she was last driven before I got her. So obviously I think the speedo cable has either deteriorated or it's come off the back of the speedo itself. So I'll whip out the cluster, should I say, and fix that at some point soon. Another 80s touch in here is, well, apart from obviously the manual choke, is the car receiver. So this car has the most basic radio you could get in any Austin Rover car of this time period, and it doesn't have a cassette deck, it is a radio only. And it's not a stereo because it only has one speaker down in this door bin here. What it also doesn't have is FM. So this radio is medium wave and long wave only, and it is a proper push button radio with a proper tuning dial as well. I don't really use it because there aren't very many radio stations still on medium wave, and long wave might as well not exist anymore. So I need to get a new radio as well. I want to get a cassette deck for it so I can listen to all my cassettes. This interior generally is much more luxurious than Melvin's, even though it is that bit older. I've got things like a handbrake gaiter and a handbrake grip. I've got a little centre console down there that I can put odds and sods in. Obviously Melvin does now have a cigarette lighter, but Melody has one from factory. She's obviously got a glove box with a glove box light in it as well. That is luxury in the 80s. She even has a little digital clock as well, which is quite cool. But undoubtedly the coolest part about the entire interior of this car is a feature that, despite all the money that Austin Rover must have spent in completely revitalising the Metro in 1990, this is a feature they took out in 1988, just the year after Melody was built, so I'm quite lucky to have this, and that is the fibre optic stalks. When you turn on the lights, a little bulb in the centre of the steering column lights up, and fibre optics take the light along to the end of the stalk, so you can see all the symbols in the stalks light up in the same green as the dashboard. So little things like that that, for some reason, make me really happy. I know I'm a bit of a weirdo, but it's the way it is. So finally, how did I come to find Melody? Well, frankly, it's all thanks to you lot. I created this channel in August 2019, just as a little thing to do during the summer, to make me feel less lazy and to just really rant about cars, frankly, because that's all I do anyway. And it's certainly what I'm doing today, and that's why I created this channel. I created this channel just as a forum to be able to just talk about cars, and because I love doing that. So it was all born out of that, because, you know, over the last 2.5 years now, God, that's quite a long time, nearly 2.5 years anyway, I now have thousands of amazing subscribers. So all you lot watching this now have made this kind of thing possible, because everybody knows I love my Metros. Everyone knows that I love my classic British cars, and I've got a taste for the unexceptional. I've got a taste for the cars that are interesting because they're old. They weren't necessarily interesting in period. They've become interesting because they're like a social artifact. So Metros, you know, by the standards of a modern Super Mini, they're rubbish. Of course they are. Even compared to the fun of a Mini, they're not as sharp in any way as a Mini, and they're not as much of a raw experience. So why you would choose a Metro over a Mini, apart from for price, which frankly is what I did 4 years ago when I bought Melvin, but we'll gloss over that, you just wouldn't. You buy it because it's a Metro. You buy it in particular because it's a social artifact of the 1980s, or because of nostalgia, or because you just find them cool. You know, of course I wasn't about in the 1980s, so, you know, but I have a lot of love for cars like this. And so that's what's led to Melody. A few months ago, I got an email from one of my subscribers, a lovely fella called David, who said that I have a 1987 Austin Metro 1.3L. Unfortunately, David struggles to drive manual cars these days, and he wanted to move on this car. But he decided he didn't want to sell it because he feared that the engine, the 1275cc engine, which is incredibly smooth because this car has only done about 40,000 miles, that little engine is in tip-top condition, and he feared that it may be ripped out along with the brakes and things like that to go into something like a Mini, something that's more expensive and therefore financially worth it. And so he didn't want it to go to someone that he didn't know. He wanted it to go to a good home that would care for the car, take it to shows, and generally improve and fettle with it to make it better and use as well, because this car hasn't been used that much over the last few years. I think I might now have put more miles on this car, unrecorded of course because the speedo's broken. I think I might have put on more miles than it has over the last few years. So that's the kind of thing. David said he wanted the car to be used and loved and taken to shows and all that kind of stuff, and so he offered the car to me, and I'm just incredibly grateful that not only do I, have this channel where I get to speak to you lot in the comments. You lot are so generous and so lovely, all that kind of stuff, for offering me support, for watching my videos, and for sending me rubbish like brochures and stuff like that for me to do videos on. But this kind of takes a biscuit. David was fortunate enough to say that, the car didn't owe him much, and he wanted to move it on to someone that would really love it and enjoy it and use it in the way that it really should be. And he said this with one condition, that if I ever sell the car, it needs to go to someone either in the Metro Owners Club or who's going to really love it. And I think that's fair enough. So yeah, I haven't paid for this car. That's just the wonderful thing about what I do, really. So yeah, so little Melody, she's been christened now. She's been donated to the channel. So this car will be a massive fixture of quite a lot of my coming videos, because I've got a lot of plans with her, and some things that I am kind of doing for the sake of videoing, because it's interesting, because I think it's cool to maybe experiment, but don't worry at all about this car. This car will be cared for and loved for, as anybody would want it to be. So yeah, she's brilliant, and I should probably talk about when we went to go and pick her up, actually. So my friend Connor came to my house. I live in Lancashire, and so he came over to mine, and we convoyed down to my friend Tom's house. So we went from Lancashire to Portsmouth in an MG Metro with a rather loud exhaust that I thought wasn't that loud until we kind of got down there and got out the car and said, oh, it's not that noisy, and then got out and had a massive headache for the next few hours. So yeah, it was a loud exhaust. Connor, your exhaust's too loud. So we went down to Portsmouth to Tom, who also has a Metro. And then the three of us went over to near Southampton, where Melody was, and we went and picked her up, drove her the half an hour or so back to Tom's, and just went over her just to make sure that she was okay, that she wasn't going to be dangerous on the way home. And then I drove her the 300 odd miles and 5 hours home. And once I got her home, she wasn't charging properly, so I needed a new alternator. I needed a new battery as well, because the battery was really on its last legs. But a new battery and a new alternator, which will come in a video next week. So you'll get to see all that before I've recorded this one. You might notice the new alternator under the bonnet, because that was necessary. But there you go, she's brilliant. She's absolutely fantastic. I love her to bits. And there'll be loads and loads of videos coming soon. But before all that, should we go for a drive? So even the driving position is completely different to Melvin. The seat's in a slightly different place, first of all. The steering column is at a completely different angle. Completely and utterly different. There is absolutely no similarity. And the pedals are in a different place as well. They are the same pedals, but mounted in a different place. I've wanted that noise in my car since I was 5 years old, and now I finally got it. Not in a Mini, but in an A-Series Metro, which is kind of... It's probably the second best thing. So the most obvious thing about this car, the most obvious problem with it, and although I'll do a proper problems video in a few weeks, is the suspension, because all of the nitrogen has escaped from the hydrogas cans, so the ride is horrendously rough. And to go with the rough ride, a load of trim rattles as well, because it's a BL car from the early 80s, well, late 80s in this case, but you know what I mean. The steering wheel itself is very similar to Melvin's original steering wheel, although without a Rover badge and in a different colour. And it is subtly different in a couple of other ways as well, but it's vaguely similar. But as I said, the steering column positioning is completely different. Melvin's is very flat. It's kind of where you'd expect it to be, although it's quite off to the left. In terms of angle, it's right is what I should say, but but Melvin's is very far over to the left. This is a little bit more pointed at you rather than being pointed away from you, but it is quite upright. There's a bit of the bus driver going on, but I don't think that's a bad thing. You know, because of the fact that you sit quite high in the car, I think it actually feels very, very natural, the position this steering wheel is in. It's far too big, so I'm going to put a smaller steering wheel on it. Of course, it doesn't have power steering, of course, and the reason they put a steering wheel this big on it is so that all the old deers could park it. But I don't need that, so I will be going for a smaller steering wheel. I love this little car. As I said, I must have driven way over 600 miles now. I don't know because the speedo's broken. I could do with fixing that as soon as possible, but it is. But she's just such a laugh. She's such a laugh to drive, and I adore that. It just she makes me happy in so many ways. Melvin makes me happy. Of course he does, but Melody feels older. Melody feels more like a Mini. Melody is a bit more bouncy, and as much as that isn't a great thing, it's entertaining. The one area that isn't entertaining is the gearbox, because that is a bit crap, really, to be honest. Love the noise that it makes, but the change quality is horrendous, and I need to leave quite some time before selecting the next gear. So that's not perfect, but the handling is immense. Handling is utterly, utterly joyous. Just like Melvin's is. This car isn't as sharp as Melvin because of the way that rear suspension's set up. And despite the fact that all Mark II Metros have an anti-roll bar at the front, at least I think it's all Mark II Metros, might only be the Mark III's, but this car rolls like hell. It just you corner on the door handles, and that's just so much more entertaining than Melvin. But Melvin is much more competent. But it means that I can flick this car into a corner, and it feels like you're going so much quicker than you actually are, and I love that. Apart from the trim rattles that I've already kind of addressed, which seem to be coming from literally every corner of the car, and you can probably hear them really well because cameras are good at picking up that kind of thing, which is bad news for you and bad news for probably your reception of this car. Sorry, A-series noises. Can't argue with that. You just cannot argue with it. The only things that can make that better are obviously an exhaust, which will be coming because this car is so quiet compared to Melvin. We'll get to the general refinement in a minute, but this car is just so quiet compared to Melvin because Melvin's got that exhaust on him. While the K-Series, I think most people would say the K-Series is a better sounding engine because this engine sounds a little bit asthmatic. You can tell it's overhead valve. You can tell it's from the 1950s. But it's all I've ever wanted from the engine in my car. Since I was 5 years old and I first wanted a Mini, this noise is all I wanted. So I'm incredibly happy to finally have a car with an A-Series in it. But generally the body shell, it's much noisier than Melvin's. There's much less sound deadening. It feels as though Austin Rover, whatever they wanted to call themselves that week, did actually modify the body shell in a couple of little ways just to reduce resonance, apart from the sound deadening, because this car, there's so much more road noise and wind noise going on in this car than there is in Melvin. And that's not from dodgy seals or anything, that's just inherent to the body shell. Yes, this is a 5-door, so I suppose it's a little bit more draggy than the 3-door shell of Melvin, but still there's just so much more noise going on. And with that little A-Series engine being a much rougher unit than the K, that has to be dampened out a bit. And again, you can feel the resonances of the engine coming through as well. And as a classic car, that's so brilliant. But I can imagine that back in the day, these felt a little bit, not antiquated, because there's a crunch. And we're probably only doing 40 miles an hour. I love it. I love it. more into the actual driving dynamics genuinely of the car. So that little engine is incredibly smooth for an A-Series, should I say. But it's so willing, and the A-Series is a very torquey engine. With it being overhead valves, that's part of it as well. But the torque characteristics are so strong on this engine that it really is a bit of a marvel compared to Melvin, who still has decent torque figures, but the engine is so very different. Melvin's K-Series is a very revvy engine. This doesn't rev. This just makes torque. This just pulls up hills like this now. But it's such a lusty little engine. It feels very, very determined, and it's not that powerful. This obviously being a 1275cc one, it's quoted about 63 brake horsepower. And the more I drive it, the better it gets, the more power it's making, the closer I think it's getting to that 63 horsepower figure. I think it's lovely. It's so grumbly. I just love, when Melvin is pulling up a hill and you're trying to get torque out of the engine, you feel like you're stressing the K-Series. When you're revving, when you're going down a country lane at 5, 6, up to 7,000 RPM, it sounds wonderful. It sounds so at home in that kind of environment. But when I'm, in the hills like I am now, or I'm pulling away from somewhere, this engine sounds so at home in the low down, grumbly, pulling stuff. And so the attitudes are so different. And I love having that, just having those two different attitudes of the engines. So finally, what are my plans with this car? Well, she needs the interior stripping out, cleaning. I want to inspect the floors for rust and stuff like that. The outside needs a good clean, a polish, and a bit of respraying as well on the crispy bits that you probably have seen. She's going to be getting a new interior because there are some issues with this interior that I'll get to in the kind of problems video that'll be coming. She'll obviously be getting a new steering wheel. I might do something to the gear change quality. I might get a rev counter. I'm obviously going to get a new radio because I need something better than AM. But yeah, she might get some new wheels as well. But that's all to come. That's all for me to decide. That's all to come. But most importantly, the first things are that she needs a few mechanical bits doing to her. So her MOT is in late January. So to prepare her for that, there are a few bits that she quite clearly needs, and that's fine. I'll do these. Most of them will be coming in a video, which is good. It means more content for you lot, and I quite like the fact that this car isn't perfect because it means I can make so many videos for you lot. So yeah, so there we go. I think that's all I really have to say now about Melody. She's wonderful. I love her to bits. And I'm just eternally thankful to all you lot, because this car wouldn't exist if it wasn't for, number one, you lot all watching this channel to grow it into what it is today, and obviously to David. So I'm absolutely stoked and incredibly grateful that I've been afforded the trust of David and all of you lot to be able to be put in the custody of this car, or for this car to be in my custody. It's probably the other way around, really. I am a bit of a glutton for punishment. This car, yeah, money and time and effort, but it's great. I love it. So on that note, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then please do click like and subscribe to TwinCam, just as usual. I'm always indebted to my wonderful Patreon supporters, so if you'd like to support me that way, then please do follow the link in the description. And obviously I'll have more videos coming along soon. Oh, she's so good.